What do you make of the claims that, well, certainly rates of diagnosis of autism have skyrocketed? Now, my understanding as a clinician is that decreases in the diagnosis of other so-called developmental disorders account for at least some of that. So many people who would have been classified using the archaic terminology of mental retardation are now shunted into the autism category. And so I can't make heads or tails out of the claims that the prevalence of autism is increasing. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So if we just take the prevalence data from the year 2000 up to today, so that's the last 25 years, the prevalence of autism has increased over 800%. So that's massive. So when I started in this field, autism was considered relatively rare. All the textbooks back in the 80s said that autism was 4 in 10,000. And today it's 1 in 30, right? So you know, our listeners would be quite reasonably asking, what is causing the increase in the prevalence? I don't think it's just the explanation you gave, which is that people that we used to call learning disability or having a learning disability or an intellectual disability, we no longer use words like retardation because they're stigmatizing. You know, is it simply that they've been reclassified as autistic? That turns out not to be the explanation, because the rate of autism in autistic people with a learning disability or an intellectual disability hasn't increased that much over 25 years. Rather, it's the other group, autistic people without a learning disability. And that can be explained because back in the mid-90s, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, DSM, that's the American Psychiatric Association's classification system, they introduced a new diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. That was DSM-4. You might remember that. But you know, suddenly there was a new diagnosis that was available, Asperger's syndrome, which was basically autism without a learning or intellectual disability, autism without a language disability or delay. And suddenly that diagnosis became available to people in the general population. Prior to that, we tended to diagnose autism with an intellectual disability. Right. What you in our previous conversation you referred to as more severe autism. In the US, they're using a term called profound autism to describe, individuals who are autistic, but who've also got many other disabilities like intellectual disability and language disability and motor disabilities. But the real increase seems to be in people whose IQ is in the average range or above, but who are seeking a diagnosis of autism. That's where the increase has come from. And I think that's because of things like social media. If we think about what's happened over the last 25 years, the internet has really taken off and social media has really taken off. People can learn about autism. 25 years ago, autism was still not very well known about. So there's been this huge increase in awareness and recognition, and particularly amongst people without a learning disability who might start thinking, I wonder if I'm autistic, or I wonder if my child's autistic. So there's been an interest in pursuing a diagnosis if a child is maybe having social and communication difficulties, or even in an adult who was overlooked in their childhood, never received a diagnosis at the age when it might have been particularly useful, but they struggled right through their teens and have made it into adulthood, but feeling, I've never really felt like I've fitted into social groups. I've always had difficulty making friends. But maybe those are individuals who show the other side of autism, the very positive side of autism, which is that laser focus on understanding how things work, understanding systems. So they may be doing very well in music or drawing or chess or activities or domains that are very predictable and highly structured and rule governed, even if they find it very stressful to have a conversation.
So is there a generalist specialist dichotomy there as well? Is it that because it seems to me that the systemizer types, their advantage is derived from a proclivity to hyper-specialize. And you could think of social intelligence in the way that we've defined it, with its focus on high-order abstraction in the social domain and a tendency to operate in the social world primarily. It looks like a social / generalizer proclivity compared to a thing-oriented. Yeah, and that's also that systemizer empathy dichotomy. How is that associated with interest in people and interest in things?
Yeah, I mean, it broadly splits along those lines.
Okay.
So someone who's a systemizer who wants to understand systems has a preference for the specific. We talked a little bit about this in the first segment. You know, if you're trying to build a bow and arrow, imagine when you were a kid and you were fascinated on, could I make a bow and arrow? It's this specific bow and arrow. Why does the arrow fly further if I have a bow that's longer or shorter? So you're trying to vary the parameters to try and make a new tool. But it's this specific one. You don't want to generalize it to all bows and arrows. It's just this particular one. And, so when we think about autistic people, they do prefer detail rather than generalities. And it's, and these different kinds of brains or minds, it's not that one is better and one is worse. We need people in the population who are good at the detail. That's why the cameras that are, we're talking through right now, that's why they work, is because the engineers have made sure that every component are fine-tuned in this particular system to work. Engineers famously say that when they're developing a new tool, they put it on repeat 1 million times to make sure that it works reliably. Think of a plane taking off and landing. 1 million takeoffs and 1 million landings happen without anything going wrong. And that's how so that's the standard that engineers want. For this very specific plane, will it repeat the operation 1 million times?
Reliably. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, you can see there that proclivity to be sensitive to abnormality, to anomaly, is actually very useful in that regard, because it has to work. Well, many of our systems are like this. They work so reliably that it's truly a kind of miracle. I mean, in a reasonable country, the lights are on essentially 100% of the time, right? Your car doesn't blow up 100% of the time. Your natural gas fittings and pipes don't ever leak. It's not 99.99%. It's way better than that, right? And so engineers will accept a failure rate of 1 in 1 million. And that's considered to be near perfect. And that's when they'll release something into the market as being safe and reliable. Whereas if you take something like empathy, where I'm trying to figure out what you're thinking, at best, all I can do is a guess. I can guess that Jordan is feeling a little bit tired. I can guess that Jordan is interested in what I'm saying, but these are just guesses because other people's mental states are not transparent. I can use your facial cues, I can use your body language, I can listen to your words, but I'll never know for certain. Whereas in the world of systemizing, I can know for certain, I've checked all of the variables, that this particular tool will work 999 times out of 1,000, or there'll only be one failure per million. So there's so specificity and understanding a system can lead to control over the system
in the world of human relationships, there's very little control.